Welcome back, all you bulls and bears and betas out there, to the buzz of this Proxyopoly spin-off series we call the Proxyopoly Podcast. I'm your host, the Proxyopolist, formerly known as the Jackal of Trades, aka Jassy here again at your service with another exclusive proprietary Proxyopoly TM research report for none other than Amazon.com Inc. That's right, Proxyopolists, following the Proxyopoly score for Deutsche Bank, BlackRock, Tesla, Walmart, ExxonMobil, Meta Platforms. We now have on the docket today for Season 2, Episode 7, the Proxyopoly score for Amazon.com Inc. In today's episode, we'll be diving into the Proxyopoly TM framework, including the ratings, methodologies, and analysis. And stay tuned to the end of the episode for the final Proxyopoly score, calculated by a weighted average of the Proxyopoly TM ratings, accompanied by the board recommendations to vote for, against, abstain, or withhold against the board of directors at Amazon's upcoming annual general meeting in 2025. Without further delay, in Proxyopoly TM's framework, each rating is measured on a beta-style scale, where 0.00 is neutral, negative values indicate more insulated conservative governance, often at the expense of agility or outside input, and positive values indicate volatile or over-concentrated power, exceeding normal market standards. Below, or in the following analysis, we analyze how Amazon's governance practices and recent developments inform each Proxyopoly TM rating, citing evidence from the company's 2025 proxy statement, DEF 14A, and relevant public information. The goal of this podcast episode is to illuminate the structural and behavioral dynamics that yield Amazon's Proxyopoly TM score, with an eye toward the implications for shareholders and stakeholders. And for the first Proxyopoly TM rating underlying the overlaying Proxyopoly TM score, we have the proxy accumulation resistance, for which Proxyopoly TM has assigned a Proxyopoly TM rating of negative 0.40, noting high resistance to outside influence. In the definition of proxy accumulation resistance, PAR as an acronym assesses the difficulty external shareholders face in accumulating enough proxy votes to effect change. Essentially, how hard is it for an investor or group of investors to challenge management's control through the ballot box? Key factors in the proxy accumulation resistance include insider ownership, the alignment of big institutional holders with management, and any historical success or failure of activist campaigns. Amazon's profile with the PAR score of negative 0.40 indicates high resistance. The company is not an impenetrable proxy fortress per se, but it presents formidable obstacles to any would-be activist. The ingredients of this resistance are evident: founder ownership and control. Jeffrey Bezos remains Amazon's single largest shareholder with 1.02 billion shares, approximately 9.6% of votable shares outstanding. Crucially, Bezos' stake, while below a majority, is so large that it can single-handedly swing any simple majority vote. Indeed, in closed shareholder votes, Bezos' shares have been decisive. For example, after the 2002 annual meeting, Amazon disclosed that multiple shareholder proposals would have passed if not for the presumptive votes of Jeff Bezos, who controlled approximately 12.7% of stock at the time. His voting power single-handedly turned what might have been majority support for some resolutions into defeat. This is a classic sign of a high proxy accumulation resistance and insider holding big enough to block initiatives even when a large fraction of outside investors are in favor. Passive investors' inertia. The next largest shareholders are passive institutional investors. Vanguard holds approximately 7.3% votable shares outstanding, and BlackRock holds approximately 5.9% votable shares outstanding, which typically vote in line with management on routine matters. These index fund giants have no incentive to wage proxy fights. They broadly default to management's recommendations except on well-publicized governance issues. Their substantial combined stake of over 13% often aligned with Bezos' votes. In effect, Bezos plus the passive index block can command roughly 1/4 of all votable shares, enough to assure a management-friendly outcome in most scenarios. Even other active funds would struggle to overcome that unified front in a contested vote. Lack of an activist beachhead is notable also in the proxy accumulation resistance. To date, Amazon has not experienced a serious proxy contest or activist campaign for board seats. This is telling. In a $1 trillion company, over $1 trillion company, by market cap, activists likely deem a challenge futile because both because of the voting math and Amazon's strong financial performance historically. The absence of activist attempts itself signals perceived high barriers. Activists pick their battles, and Amazon's fortress-like mix of loyal insider ownership and sympathetic long-term shareholders make it an unappealing target. The only shareholder activism manifests as non-binding proposals, which, as we will see, rarely garner majority support due to these structural impediments. Proxy access is also a factor taken into consideration for the proxy accumulation resistance. In theory, Amazon's proxy access bylaw, allowing qualifying shareholders to nominate directors on the company's proxy, could lower the barrier to proxy accumulation. The company allows a shareholder or group holding 3% stock for 3 years to nominate up to 20% of the board. However, in practice, mounting a proxy access campaign at Amazon would still require substantial investor coordination and likely tacit approval from proxy advisors and large institutions. Given Bezos' influence and the typically large number of shares needed, 3% of Amazon is roughly $50 billion in votable stock, a threshold only a handful of institutions meet. This mechanism has not been used. Proxy access exists on paper, but has not materially reduced Amazon's proxy accumulation resistance. It is a safety valve that no one has successfully turned. In contextual comparison, a proxy accumulation resistance of negative 0.40 is in the high resistance band of the Proxyopoly ratings framework. It is better or less entrenched than a true proxy fortress, which would be less than negative 0.50, where challenges are practically impossible. For instance, in dual-class stock companies like Meta Platforms, mentioned in last week's episode, where Mark Zuckerberg's super voting shares guarantee control, would score below negative 0.50, and has. However, Amazon's single-class share structure means challengers aren't legally disenfranchised. If a groundswell of support emerged, say a coalition of institutional investors truly aligning against management, there is a theoretical path to change, but that path is steeply uphill. Amazon's resistance is comparable to other founder-led tech giants that lack dual-class shares, but where the founder's sizable stake and shareholder goodwill deter activism. For example, Netflix in the Reed Hastings era. Notably, Amazon's proxy accumulation resistance is slightly more entrenched than ExxonMobil was. The positive 0.55 proxy accumulation resistance for ExxonMobil indicated some vulnerability. Indeed, Exxon saw a successful proxy battle in 2021, whereas Amazon has seen no proxy battles. We attribute this difference to Bezos' ongoing presence and the unified support of passive investors. In summary, anyone attempting to accumulate proxies against Amazon's board faces an arduous task. The combination of Bezos' approximate 10% stake and the index fund voting bloc passively creates a structural shield. With a proxy accumulation resistance of negative 0.40, Amazon's governance is insulated enough to ward off the most external challenges, though not so insular as to be completely unassailable. Barring an extraordinary coalition of shareholders or a catastrophic drop in performance that unites investors for change, the current board can breathe easy knowing that shareholder democracy at Amazon tilts heavily in their favor. Moving on to the next Proxyopoly TM rating underlying the overlaying Proxyopoly TM score is the Bylaw Fortification Index, or BFI, for which Proxyopoly TM has assigned a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 0.20, noting a hardened governance structure. Definition of this Bylaw Fortification Index, or BFI, evaluates how the company's charter and bylaws reinforce entrenchment or impede shareholder-led reforms. It looks at formal governance provisions, classified boards, supermajority requirements, poison pills, special meeting rights, proxy access, dual-class equity, etc. High positive BFI means the rule book is stacked to protect management. A negative Bylaw Fortification Index means governance rules actively empower shareholders and accountability. Amazon's governance provisions taken into consideration for the Bylaw Fortification Index include where Amazon's BFI of 0.20 positively lands in the hardened structure territory. The company's formal governance leans toward management entrenchment, albeit with some standard good governance elements present. Key factors in this include special meetings and written consent. Amazon permits shareholders to call a special meeting, but only if they hold at least 25% of outstanding shares. This threshold is extremely high. Higher than the 10 to 15% threshold many companies have adopted under investor pressure. At 25% of outstanding votable shares, Amazon's threshold is effectively one of the most restrictive among large cap firms. Only a shareholder as large as Jeff Bezos, who himself holds less than 10% votable shares outstanding, could even contemplate this. In practice, it will require Bezos plus at least one major institution acting together to call a special meeting. This dilutes shareholders' ability to address urgent issues between annual meetings. Additionally, Amazon does not permit action by written consent. There is no indication in the proxy statement that shareholders can act without a meeting. A right that, if existed, would typically be highlighted, so we infer it's disallowed. Together, the high special meeting threshold and a lack of written consent means shareholders have very limited avenues to raise issues except at the official annual general meeting, giving management tight control over timing and agenda of corporate decision-making. Supermajority vote requirements taken into consideration as a factor in the Bylaw Fortification Index, although Amazon's proxy doesn't explicitly flag any supermajority provisions for the charter and bylaw amendments. The company has historically engaged in what amounts to, quote, supermajority by stealth, unquote, through its vote counting methodology. Specifically, when tallying votes on shareholder proposals, Amazon counts abstentions as votes against. This means that to reach a true majority of votes cast in favor, a proposal actually needs an even higher proportion of yes votes if some investors abstain. For example, if 10% abstain and 45 vote for a proposal, Amazon would report that as 45% for out of 55% cast, which is 81.8% of votes cast, actually a win on a simple majority basis. Yet because abstentions are treated as against, the proposal would be recorded as failing with only 45% support. 45 out of 100? 45%. I'm not here to teach math to you. This is essentially a supermajority requirement in disguise, forcing proponents to clear a higher threshold than 50% of votes cast. In 2019, a shareholder resolution explicitly challenged this practice and called for a simple majority standard, noting that Amazon's formula, quote, mathematically converts every abstention into a vote against, unquote. The board opposed that proposal, and notably as of 2025, the company still employs this formula swapping approach. By contrast, many peers, Facebook, Meta, Apple, Microsoft, count for versus against as per Council of Institutional Investors best practices. Amazon's refusal to modernize its vote count standard is a clear fortification of management's position. It has engineered the rules of the game to make winning shareholder proposals much harder. Board structure and election standards taken into consideration for the Bylaw Fortification Index. On this positive side, Amazon has a single-class share structure. One share, one vote for common stock. There are no multi-class equity or voting rights gimmicks. All 12 directors are elected annually. The board declassified itself years ago, and critically, Amazon has adopted a majority voting standard for director elections in uncontested election meetings. This means if a director nominee fails to get more, quote, for, unquote, votes than, quote, against, unquote, they are expected to resign. This is a shareholder-friendly provision, though largely symbolic in Amazon's case, since with management's proxies, it's unlikely any nominee fails to clear 50%. Still, it prevents the scenario of directors being elected with only plurality support. Amazon also has proxy access, 3% for 3 years, again up to 2 nominees or 20% of the board, which is now a market standard shareholder right. These elements, annual elections, majority vote, proxy access, are hallmarks of neutral or shareholder-friendly bylaws. They temper Amazon's BFI score, keeping it out of the minefield territory. Takeover defense is also taken into consideration for the Bylaw Fortification Index. Amazon does not appear to have a standing poison pill rights plan in effect. Its charter does not have any supermajority stock or golden shares. That said, with a company of Amazon's size, hostile takeovers are practically moot. It's too large to be acquired without board consent. So the absence of a poison pill is more a reflection of reality than a deliberate openness to take over. If threatened, Amazon's board could always adopt a poison pill quickly. Delaware law, Amazon's jurisdiction, also provides default anti-takeover protections, and Amazon has the typical blank check preferred stock authorized, which could be used as a takeover defense if ever needed, a latent defense common in large companies. Net effect of this Bylaw Fortification Index: Amazon's bylaws are a mix of standard governance and bespoke barriers. The result is a Bylaw Fortification Index of positive 0.20, signifying a structure that is not blatantly oppressive but clearly tightly constrained in favor of management's control. Shareholders have just enough rights to suggest openness. They can vote directors out under certain conditions. They can propose candidates via proxy access, etc. But they have high hurdles, 25% for meetings, abstentions counted against proposals, which make those rights difficult to exercise meaningfully. It's a clear, clever balance. Amazon can claim it meets many governance best practices on paper, while in practice it insulates itself through less obvious means. One striking illustration of this balance is how the company reacts to shareholder calls for reform. Rather than enshrining blatantly entrenching provisions in the charter, Amazon uses policy and procedure to achieve the same ends. For example, rather than a formal supermajority vote requirement which would draw criticism, they achieve the effect by vote counting policy. Rather than forbid shareholders from calling special meetings outright, they set the threshold so high it's nearly unusable. This sophistication in bylaw fortification earns Amazon a moderately positive BFI, Proxyopoly TM rating. The governance architecture subtly but effectively reinforces the incumbency of the board and limits the impact of shareholder efforts to drive change. The next Proxyopoly TM rating, underlying the overlaying Proxyopoly TM score, is the Shareholder Hostility Quotient, or SHQ for acronym. And for this Shareholder Hostility Quotient, Proxyopoly TM has assigned a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 1.40 for the shareholder hostility quotient, noting active resistance to shareholder input. By definition, the shareholder hostility quotient, or SHQ, measures the degree to which the company's culture and practices are adversarial to shareholder engagement and proposals. It goes beyond the written rules of the Bylaw Fortification Index to assess behavior, how management handles shareholder proposals, the tone in communications, willingness to implement suggestions, and general openness or hostility to investor feedback, especially on environmental, social, and governance issues. Amazon's approach to shareholders. Amazon's shareholder hostility quotient of positive 1.40 signals a deeply defensive and sometimes combative stance towards shareholder involvement, placing it firmly in, quote, hostile territory, unquote, per Proxyopoly TM criteria. The evidence is ample. Volume of proposals rejected. Amazon has been inundated with shareholder resolutions in recent years, a byproduct of its vast operations and myriad stakeholder concerns. The board acknowledges receiving 18 or more proposals each of the past 5 years, with over 170 in the last decade. In 2022, a record 15 shareholder proposals went to a vote, ranging from climate impact and packaging reduction to workplace safety and pay equity. The board opposed every single one. In 2023 and again in 2025, the company faced 8 shareholder proposals, the board's official recommendation for each and every proposal being against. There is no clearer sign of an oppositional posture than a blanket policy of recommending against all shareholder-sponsored items regardless of merit. Even companies with poor governance records sometimes concede on a minor proposal or negotiate a withdrawal. Amazon's default is to fight them all. Other evidence to cite here in the shareholder hostility quotient is shareholder proposal outcomes. Unsurprisingly, given management stance and voting influence, no shareholder proposal has passed at Amazon in recent memory. However, many have come close, indicating significant investor support despite management's opposition. At the 2022 annual general meeting, several resolutions garnered over 40% support. For example, 47% for a lobbying disclosure report, 44% for an independent warehouse conditions audit, and 48% for plastic packaging reduction. These are strikingly high levels of dissent from shareholders. Rather than treat these as clear signals to change, Amazon's board appears to treat them as inconveniences to be swatted away. For example, the proposal for a warehouse working conditions audit, essentially a third-party assessment of Amazon's workplace safety, prompted by reports of high injury rates, has been on the ballot for multiple years. It earned 44% in 2022, a substantial vote indicating concern. Yet Amazon's response in the 2025 proxy statement is to oppose it again, claiming the requested audit would be duplicative of disclosures it already provides. This despite continuing criticism from labor advocates and new reports of injuries. The board's position remains that it knows best, and no independent check is needed, since such deafness to repeat strong shareholder voices exemplifies hostility. The board would rather spin the narrative than yield to investor pressure. Other evidence to cite here in the shareholder hostility quotient is the engagement versus escapism. Amazon's proxy statement devotes space to describing extensive shareholder engagement, regular meetings with large investors, even involvement of the lead independent director and committee chairs in some discussions. On paper, this sounds commendable. However, the content of Amazon's engagement reveals a one-way street. The company states that it carefully evaluates each proposal, but, quote, often opposes these proposals, especially the many that largely repeat prior year's proposals, unquote. Amazon tends to take the stance that it is already doing what the proposal asks, or that the proposal is unnecessary, no matter the issue. In the proxy, the board systemically lists reasons to vote against each proposal, frequently asserting we already do X, or we have addressed Y. For instance, on the proposal about climate impacts of data centers, Amazon points to existing sustainability reports. On the proposal about artificial intelligence oversight, Amazon touts its responsible AI principles. While it's valid that Amazon has initiatives in these areas, the rote, quote, we've got this covered, unquote, response to every concern comes off as dismissive. There is little acknowledgement of gaps or willingness to incorporate shareholder ideas. Engagement in Amazon's practice seems less about listening and adapting, and more about convincing shareholders that management is already doing a fine job. Essentially an exercise in deflection. The tone and language evidenced in the shareholder hostility quotient by Amazon's communications. The tone Amazon uses when discussing shareholder proposals can only be described as dryly contemptuous. The proxy statement dedicates a section to bemoaning the burden of dealing with so many proposals, noting, quote, the vast amount of time and financial resources, unquote, spent, and suggesting that effort, quote, could be better spent focused on building our business, unquote. It even impugns the motives of some proponents, implying they seek personal publicity or have objectives contrary to shareholder value. Furthermore, Amazon complains that proposals, quote, often contain inaccurate or biased assertions even after the company points them out. This is an extraordinary statement effectively accusing proponents and proxy advisor firm reports on proposals of bad faith or ignorance. While the company may have legitimate disagreements on facts, airing it in this manner in the proxy statement is unusual. It underscores a perception that shareholder activists are antagonists to be rebutted, not partners in improving the company. By contrast, a company with a low shareholder hostility quotient might say, "We appreciate the proponent's concerns, and while we agree on the importance of X, we differ on approach." Amazon instead uses a blanket indictment of shareholder proposal process as misguided. Moving on to the next evidence to cite in the shareholder hostility quotient is retaliatory or preventative measures. One hallmark of hostility is when management not only opposes proposals but seeks to avoid facing them entirely. Amazon has a history of attempting to exclude proposals through the Securities Exchange Commission's no action request. For example, proposals on contentious issues like racial equity audits or competitive practices have faced challenges. Notably, Amazon initially fought to exclude a racial equity audit proposal, then relented and conducted an audit voluntarily. A rare instance where it bowed to pressure likely to preempt an embarrassing vote. Additionally, Amazon has made slight concessions strategically to stave off more drastic shareholder action. For instance, the company instituted the special meeting right, at least 25% likely to appease investors calling for it, while making it practically unusable, as previously mentioned. These tactic maneuvers indicate a desire to control the narrative and outcomes, engage just enough to deflate momentum for a change, but never truly empower shareholders. In aggregate, Amazon's interactions with its shareholders over governance and ESG matters reflect a philosophy of management knows best. The board and executives do not appear to view shareholder proposals as helpful feedback, but rather as challenges to be overcome. The shareholder hostility quotient of positive 1.40 is among the highest in our coverage, comparable to firms that have openly fought shareholder activists and only grudgingly yielded under extreme duress. Amazon hasn't faced a high-profile proxy fight, but in the realm of shareholder resolutions, its hostility is on full display. This hostility extends to even fundamental governance improvements. For example, resisting the switch to simple majority vote counts for years and opposing independent board leadership, indicating that shareholder input is systemically undervalued at Amazon's board of directors. For Amazon to reduce its shareholder hostility quotient, it would need to demonstrate a more receptive attitude, perhaps endorse a shareholder proposal or implement one with significant support, tone down the combative rhetoric, and proactively address issues like workplace safety or climate impact in collaboration with investors. As of now, the company's stance sends a clear message. Shareholder ideas are not welcome unless they coincidentally align with management's pre-existing plans. In Proxyopoly TM terms, that is a textbook case of shareholder hostility, hence the higher shareholder hostility quotient Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 1.40. The next Proxyopoly TM rating underlying the overlaying Proxyopoly TM score for Amazon is the Executive Entrenchment Factor, or acronym EEF, for which Proxyopoly TM has assigned a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 0.80, noting concentrated executive power. By definition, EEF gauges how firmly the CEO and top executives have cemented their power relative to the board and shareholders. Factors include combined CEO chair roles, CEO tenure and succession planning, board independence from management, and whether mechanisms exist to check or replace leadership if needed. Leadership structure at Amazon. Amazon's EEF of 0.80 reflects strong entrenchment. The leadership, past and present, maintains outside influence and is shielded from typical accountability mechanisms. Several aspects inform this. Notably, chair-CEO separation in name only. On paper, Amazon separated the roles of chair and CEO in 2021 when Jeff Bezos stepped down as CEO and became executive chair, with Andy Jassy succeeding him as chief executive officer. However, this has not resulted in truly independent leadership. Bezos, as executive chair, continues to be an officer of the company and by all accounts wields tremendous influence. He is, after all, the company's founder and innovator-in-chief. The chair role was not given to an independent director, but retained by Bezos, meaning Amazon did not embrace the governance best practice of having an independent chair to oversee the CEO. Instead, it effectively split the titles between two insiders. In many respects, Amazon still operates as it did when Jeff Bezos was CEO. Except now he can focus on long-term strategy and his other endeavors. While Jassy handles day-to-day operations, the executive chair arrangement suggests Bezos has a permanent seat of power. The board's opposition to a policy requiring independent chair underscores that they intend for Bezos or potentially another executive insider to hold the chairpersonship, going forward. This persistence of insider control at the top contributes heavily to the executive entrenchment factor, or ETH, Proxyopoly TM rating. Founder dominance and tenure, aspects which inform this Proxyopoly TM rating for ETH. Jeff Bezos has been on the board since 1994 and served as Amazon's CEO for 27 years. Such a lengthy tenure, while a testament to his success, also means the company's culture and governance were molded by one personality for decades. Even after stepping down as CEO, Bezos' continued presence can inhibit truly fresh oversight. The board may find it difficult to contradict or constrain a founder of his stature. Bezos also embodies the imperial CEO model. During his tenure as CEO, he had no separate chairperson above him, and even now, effectively, no equal on the board. As executive chair, he outranks the lead independent director in hierarchy. The EEF criteria consider long CEO tenure and lack of succession planning as warning signs. Amazon did not have a succession for Bezos in Jassy, but notably Jassy is a loyal lieutenant who's been with Amazon since 1997 and built AWS. He's not an outsider shake-up artist. The handoff from Bezos to Jassy was the passing of the torch to a protege, ensuring the continuity of Bezos' ethos. In other words, even succession was orchestrated to preserve the existing power structure, not to invite change. Board independence and refreshment as aspects to inform the executive entrenchment factor. A genuinely empowered independent board is the main check on an entrenched executive team. In Amazon's case, independence is mixed. The majority of directors are technically independent under NASDAQ rules, but several have long tenures or personality ties that could compromise their objectivity. For instance, Patricia Q. Stonesifer has been on the board since 1997, making her one of the longest-serving directors in the S&P 500. Jamie Gorelick joined in 2012, and others like John Rubinstein in 2010. These directors have over a decade of service each, overlapping extensively with Bezos' reign. Long tenure can breed collegial relationships that make directors less inclined to challenge the status quo. Gorelick and Stonesifer in particular have served through many cycles of Amazon's growth, likely developing loyalty to Bezos' vision. Until recently, the board has seen minimal turnover aside from adding seats. It's telling that 4 of Amazon's 10 independent director nominees have served more than 10 years, and only 4 have joined in the last 5. This balance skews older than many large tech peers which have seen more board refreshment. The presence of a lead independent director in Gorelick is a positive, but in practice her ability to push back on Bezos or Jassy is questionable given the dynamics. Moreover, Amazon's board committees are chaired by these long-tenured figures. Audit chaired by Nooyi is an exception, as she's newer, but nominating and pay committees consist of insiders to Amazon's culture or handpicked by Bezos' inner circle. The board thus far has not forced any major governance changes on management. Rather, it appears management, Bezos namely, has largely dictated the board's composition and policies. This dynamic, the board aligned with and perhaps deferential to an iconic founder and his chosen successor, is a hallmark of entrenchment. Other evidence or aspects to inform the executive entrenchment factor is the executive compensation oversight. Another angle on is whether the board holds executives accountable through pay discipline and performance requirements. In 2022, Amazon's shareholders signaled dissatisfaction by giving only 56% support to the Say on Pay vote, largely due to a $350 million stock grant awarded to Andy Jassy upon becoming CEO. That grant vests over 10 years, which the board defended as aligning with long-term success, but many investors viewed as excessive upfront pay. The board's Leadership Development and Compensation Committee, chaired by Edith Cooper, responded by not granting Jassy any new equity in 2023 or 2024, effectively pausing large awards to let previous grants absorb. This responsiveness slightly moderates executive entrenchment factor. It shows the board can adjust course under shareholder pressure. However, it's notable that it took an investor revolt for the board to exercise restraint, implying that initially the board was ready to lavish enormous pay with little performance linkage. Jassy's 2021 mega grant had no performance conditions and was only time vesting. The fact that Bezos never received significant equity grants in later years, his wealth being majority in stock holdings, meant Amazon's pay votes were routinely in the past. Once a new CEO needed compensation, the board stumbled. They have since corrected, but the episode suggests the board was not proactively ensuring pay for performance until investors forced Amazon's hand. That indicates a board that tends to rubber stamp management's preferences unless external voices intervene. Again, consistent with a somewhat complacent board under a strong executive influence. Accountability mechanisms as aspects to inform the executive entrenchment factor. If Amazon's CEO underperforms, what would it take for the board to remove or replace him? It's a hypothetical worth considering for if Andy Jassy has only been CEO for approximately 3.5 years. In 2022, Amazon's stock fell sharply, with broader tech turndown, testing confidence in the new CEO. While some cost-cutting and refocusing occurred, layoffs in late 2022, scaling back on certain projects, etc., there was never a hint that the board might consider new leadership. That's normal given Jassy's short tenure, but also reflective of Amazon's culture and long-term patience, which can tip into unaccountability. Bezos enjoyed decades of board support even through volatility. Jassy likely has a long leash as well, especially since Bezos as executive chair is there to guide him rather than judge him impartially. The board has not established any explicit succession plan beyond Jassy. If Jassy were to falter, Bezos could even step back in, as other founders have done elsewhere. In essence, the normal corporate governance idea that the board can fire the CEO is somewhat theoretical at Amazon. In practice, it seems the CEO, current and former, dominates the board. There's scant evidence of robust oversight that could challenge strategic decisions made by Bezos or Jassy. Overall, Amazon's executive entrenchment factor, or ETH, is high because power at the top has been extraordinarily stable and resistant to outside checks. From 1994 to 2021, Jeff Bezos was the unrivaled leader. In the transition sense, he remains a looming presence, and Andy Jassy, having grown up professionally under Bezos, represents continuity. The board largely reflects Bezos' chosen advisors and confidants. This is not a company where activist investors depose CEOs or where boards suddenly replace management after poor quarters. Rather, it's a company where leadership changes come from the leader's own choices. Namely, when Bezos decided to step down when it suited him. And where the board's role is largely supportive. By typical public company standards, that's a concentration of executive power well beyond the norm, albeit one that has coincided with tremendous business success. To reduce entrenchment, Amazon's board would need to assert more independence, perhaps by eventually moving to an independent chair model, continuing to refresh its membership with directors unencumbered by long Bezos-era tenures, and setting clear performance benchmarks for management. But as it stands, the executives are firmly in the driver's seat, and the board seems content to ride along. Another Proxyopoly TM rating underlying the overlaying Proxyopoly TM score is the regulatory evasion measure, for which Proxyopoly TM has assigned a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 1.10, operating well beyond effective regulation. Definition: regulatory evasion measure, or REM, evaluates how effectively a company evades or influences regulatory oversight, including through lobbying, political influence, opacity, or sheer size that make it too large to regulate. A high regulatory evasion measure suggests the company often escapes accountability from government regulators or uses its clout to shape rules in its favor. Amazon's regulatory and political footprint to note in the regulatory evasion measure. Amazon's regulatory evasion measure of positive 1.10 indicates a systemic shadow operator. A company that, despite enormous economic impact, manages to remain largely unchecked by traditional regulatory frameworks. Evidence for this characterization includes antitrust and market dominance. Perhaps the clearest example of Amazon's regulatory evasion until recently has been its ability to grow a dominant market position in e-commerce and cloud computing with minimal interference. For years, antitrust enforcers took a hands-off approach as Amazon acquired companies and competitors such as Zappos, Diapers.com, etc., and expanded into new sectors. Only in late 2023 did the Federal Trade Commission and state attorneys generals finally file a landmark antitrust lawsuit against Amazon, alleging a pattern of exclusionary conduct to maintain monopoly power. The complaint details how Amazon allegedly stifles price competition and innovation and punishes sellers that don't use its logistics or comply with its terms. The fact that such practices went legally unchallenged for years highlights Amazon's adeptness at operating in gray areas, leveraging its platform power in ways that arguably harm competitors, but doing so in a novel context that regulators were slow to address. The, quote, consumer welfare, unquote, lens in antitrust was not used to dealing with a company that simultaneously lowers consumer prices but squeezes sellers. Amazon now faces this major case, but its initial response was dismissive. The company argued the Federal Trade Commission suit would, quote, lead to higher prices and slower deliveries, unquote, for consumers, positioning itself as aligned with consumer interest. This signals Amazon's strategy to beat regulation by arguing that what's good for Amazon is good for consumers. Even if the case proceeds, resolution could be years away, and Amazon will undoubtedly deploy armies of lawyers and lobbyists to avoid any structural remedies. In the meantime, it's business as usual, i.e., the alleged monopolistic practices continuing unabated. Lobbying and political influence as evidence for the characterization in the regulatory evasion measure. Amazon spends aggressively on lobbying. In 2022, it spent roughly $19 million in federal lobbying, one of the highest amounts among U.S. companies. Its lobbying covers an array of issues: antitrust, trying to prevent stricter competition laws; labor, opposing the PRO Act and stricter workplace safety regulations; privacy and data, influencing how federal privacy legislation might preempt a stronger state law; and taxation, fending off corporate tax hikes or digital services taxes abroad. The company has cultivated relationships on both sides of the aisle. For instance, it famously courted the Pentagon for cloud contracts and challenged previous administrations when it suspected presidential interference in contract awards. The presence of General Keith Alexander on the board is itself a form of regulatory influence. His deep ties in Washington and the defense community potentially give Amazon an inside track or at least insight into government thinking. Amazon's Political Action Committee and executives, including Bezos when he was CEO, have contributed to lawmakers who shape policies on trade, labor, and tech regulation. This all amounts to a significant influence operation. Amazon isn't just reacting to regulations, it is often proactively shaping them. For example, Amazon has been involved in drafting federal privacy proposals that would override state regulations, which would save it from having to meet tougher California standards. And it engages heavily with the United States Postal Service and transportation policy to benefit its logistics network. Such interference helps Amazon avoid onerous regulation or tailor legislation to its liking, which is the essence of a high regulatory evasion measure as a Proxyopoly TM rating. Compliance versus enforcement gaps also taken into consideration for the regulatory evasion measure. In areas where rules do exist, Amazon has a pattern of pushing boundaries. Take taxation. For years, Amazon famously paid little to no federal income tax. using credits and accelerated depreciation. While legal, this avoidance drew public ire. Eventually, Amazon began voluntarily reporting more about its tax payments in a nod to transparency. In product safety, Amazon long argued it wasn't liable for defective products sold by third-party merchants on its platform, exploiting a loophole where it's neither the manufacturer nor the direct seller of record. Only recently have some courts and laws started to hold marketplaces accountable, and Amazon has fought those precedents. In labor practices, Amazon has settled cases or paid fines, for instance, a fine by the National Labor Relations Board for anti-union conduct or OSHA citations for warehouse safety, but often without admitting wrongdoing and without a fundamental change in practices. These fines are often tiny relative to Amazon's size, effectively a cost of doing business. Amazon's sheer scale, with 1.5 million employees, operations across the globe, makes comprehensive enforcement difficult. Regulators are often playing whack-a-mole with individual facilities or incidents. For example, isolated inspections at warehouses, while the broader schematic issues, such as production quotas leading to injuries reported by investigative journalists, persist. In this sense, Amazon achieves a de facto evasion. It is subject to laws on paper, but the enforcement mechanisms haven't compelled an overhaul of, say, its warehouse labor model yet. Jurisdictional arbitrage also taken into consideration for the regulatory evasion measure. Amazon's business spans multiple countries, and it has shown savvy in arbitraging regulations. A salient example is data privacy and competition in the European Union and United States. The European Union has been more aggressive. Amazon was investigated for using third-party seller data to advantage its own products, resulting in commitments to change some practices. But Amazon's agreements in one jurisdiction don't necessarily constrain it elsewhere. Another example, Amazon's cloud unit, AWS, can shift customer data storage locations to comply with or avoid certain data residency laws, leveraging its global infrastructure to adapt around regulatory burdens. In the terms of corporate structure, Amazon's European retail operations long routed sales through Luxembourg to minimize taxes until public pressure forced some changes. All of these illustrate a company adept at minimizing regulatory impact by exploiting differences in laws and enforcement across regions. Systemic importance without commensurate regulations is also taken into consideration for the regulatory evasion measure. Amazon has effectively become part of a critical national infrastructure, especially AWS, which hosts government and Fortune 500 systems. And Amazon's logistics, which during the pandemic was vital for supply chains, yet unlike banks, which are heavily regulated due to systemic importance, Amazon isn't subject to a comparable regulatory regime. The company has thus far avoided being designated or treated as a systemically important entity, no too big to fail oversight or special constraints, even though an AWS failure or collapse of Amazon's delivery network could have wide economic effects. This gap between Amazon's systemic role and the lack of tailored regulation is a significant facet of regulatory evasion measure. Amazon effectively enjoys the benefit of being crucial to the economy without the tightened scrutiny that typically accompanies such status. In aggregate, Amazon's regulatory evasion measure of positive 1.10 captures a company that frequently outmaneuvers regulators and operates on the frontier of what laws cover. It's not that Amazon blatantly breaks laws. In fact, it prides itself on legal compliance. Rather, it pushes the boundaries of the law and often finds loopholes or leverage to remain unchecked. When confronted with new rules, it lobbies to water them down. When faced with enforcement, it litigates or nominally complies without altering its strategy. The result is that Amazon often sets its own rules. This is the essence of a shadow regulator, a private actor whose power sometimes rivals that of public regulators. The ongoing antitrust case will be a major test. It could reduce Amazon's REM if regulators succeed in imposing changes. Conversely, if Amazon largely prevails or delays significant action, it will reinforce that even the U.S. government struggles to constrain Amazon's dominance. Given Amazon's track record, one cannot discount its ability to bend the arc of regulation in its favor. Until we see evidence of robust regulatory checks actually reshaping Amazon's behavior, its REM will remain high. Summarizing the Proxyopoly TM ratings, having heard all 5, the proxy accumulation resistance for Amazon is negative 0.40. The Bylaw Fortification Index for Amazon is positive 0.20. The Shareholder Hostility Quotient for Amazon is positive 1.40. The Executive Entrenchment Factor, EVE, is positive 0.80. And the Regulatory Evasion measure is positive 1.10. Having now touched on all 5 Proxyopoly TM ratings underlying the overlaying Proxyopoly score and reaching the first hour of this podcast, we will now calculate the final Proxyopoly score based on a weighted average calculation. Stuck there. The final Proxyopoly score for Amazon.com Inc. is positive 0.68. This composite score places Amazon well above a neutral 0.00, reflecting a pronounced tilt toward entrenchment, power concentration, and anti-democratic governance norms. Amazon exhibits elements of a proxy-fortified power structure, leadership that is largely unaccountable except to itself, governance provisions that frustrate shareholder influence, a culture that rebuffs investor oversight, and a deft ability to defang regulations. While not the absolute extreme case in every category, Amazon has only a single class of stock, for instance, avoiding the dual-class supervoting trap. The company scores highly on 4 of the 5 Proxyopoly TM ratings, indicating a systemic pattern of governance and balance. In the sections that follow in this podcast, we will highlight the most egregious controversies informing these Proxyopoly TM ratings and offer detailed recommendations for the board of directors at Amazon's upcoming annual general meeting. But before we do, we're going to have a moment to take a break, Proxyopolis. This is a time in the podcast where sponsored content could be plugged, contributed content could be plugged. There's time for advertisements, too. We can tell you what snacks to snack on, what beverages to sip on, what toilet paper to wipe your ass with. Go print off the Proxyopoly score for Amazon today on Patreon, which can be found on the Linktree at linktree/nascarcosa, and wipe the shit you ate for lunch on it. I don't really give a damn. Just pay for the Proxyopoly on the Patreon, and you can get access to all the proprietary Proxyopoly TM research reports. Or you can just keep listening on this podcast. Either way, my voice is protected under the trademark. Get a taste, Proxyopolis. Going on to the controversies of the Proxyopoly in action at Amazon. In evaluating Amazon through the Proxyopoly TM framework, one controversy looms largest as a symbol of the company's governance ethos. Amazon's systemic thwarting of shareholder voting power, culminating in what Proxyopoly TM dubs the Formula One controversy. Amazon's race to stay number one by engineering its proxy voting formula. This issue, while technical at first glance, epitomizes the lengths to which Amazon's leadership will go to preserve control and silence dissenting shareholder votes. It aligns squarely with Proxyopoly TM's focus on power distortion and is, in Proxyopoly TM's assessment, the most egregious recent controversy affecting Amazon's governance. This controversy in spotlight the vote count swap, the great vote count swap. How Amazon rigged shareholder votes. Imagine a shareholder proposal at Amazon manages to win a narrow majority of votes cast, say, by 51%. For 49% against, a clear indication that shareholders favor the change. You might think that the proposal would pass. Not at Amazon, thanks to a sly arithmetic trick in Amazon's bylaws. Any abstentions are counted as if they are votes against the proposal. This means 51% scenario could be nullified if a few percent abstained. This will report that the proposal failed to reach a majority of the total votes, including abstentions. In practice, this has allowed Amazon to declare proposals rejected, even when more shares were voted for than against. It is 100% legal under Delaware law and the company's charter, and 100% contrary to the principle of simple majority rule. This formula swapping controversy came to a head in 2019 when a shareholder backed by Investor Voice and Newground Social Investment filed a resolution explicitly challenging Amazon's vote counting method. The proponent pointed out that Amazon's inconsistent formulas, a fair for versus against count for director elections, but a harsher count abstains as against for shareholder proposals, which constituted a governance failure in their argument. They also noted that over 100 shareholder proposals at various companies had been defeated in name despite actually receiving a majority of votes cast due to similar tricks. At Amazon, they argued this practice, quote, disadvantages shareholders in two ways. It effectively converts abstentions into no votes, and management captures blank votes in accordance with the board's recommendations. In other words, Amazon's rules ensure management gets the benefit of the doubt on every undecided or neutral ballot. The ask was simple. Amend governing documents so that all shareholder items are decided by a true simple majority of votes cast, excluding abstentions. Amazon's board opposed that resolution, and it failed. Under the very vote counting standard it sought to change. The board insisted that its vote count methodology was fine and that differences in counting didn't favor management, a claim the proponent flatly debunked as misleading by noting the precise exception that benefits management. Fast forward to 2025. Amazon still counts votes the same way. The legacy of this is evident in the razor-thin votes at the 2022 annual general meeting. Reports show that shareholders came within 2 percentage points of approving a plastic reduction proposal and within 6 points of rejecting executive pay. Explicitly noted those outcomes would have flipped if not for Bezos' share tipping the balance. But there's another layer. Those percentages were calculated by Amazon's formula, including abstentions. The investor who filed the 2019 proposal calculated that in some cases, Amazon's abstention gap suppressed the result by up to 2 to 3%, enough to turn what would be over 50% of votes cast into reported less than 50% votes, being majority. It is entirely plausible that at least one of these shareholder proposals that failed at approximately 47 to 48% support in recent years actually had a true majority of votes cast in favor if abstentions were set aside. Amazon's formula ensured they all failed officially. Why is this such a big deal? Because it strikes at the core of shareholder democracy. One share, one vote is a hollow promise if the vote counted is skewed. Amazon effectively gave management a built-in handicap. Every abstaining share and every undirected proxy, which by default goes to management's recommended vote, is counted as backing management's position. In a close contest, that's likely spotting one team extra points on the scoreboard. This controversy perfectly illustrates Proxyopoly's thesis of a proxy-fortified power structure, Amazon took the proxy voting process and fortified it in their favor through fine print. From a satirical standpoint, one might applaud Amazon for innovating in an unexpected area, corporate mathematics. They've managed to make 49% more than 51% when needed, a feat Orwell's Ministry of Truth would admire. In Amazon's world, abstaining shareholders mysteriously become allies of management, and silence equals dissent against change. The dry irony is palpable. The company that can quantify every click and package down to the last decimal prefers a fuzzy math when it comes to quantifying investor support for governance reforms. This vote count controversy is egregious because it's so transparently self-serving. It's not about Amazon's business success or failure. It's about actively denying shareholders a fair mechanism to express their collective will. Even after being called out publicly, Amazon clings to this practice. Proxy advisors, institutional investors, and governance experts overwhelmingly favor simple majority vote standards. Amazon's intransigence on this issue is a giant red flag. It signals that the board will resort to any measure, however arcane, to dilute shareholder influence. In a broader context, this controversy feeds directly into Amazon's shareholder hostility quotient and Bylaw Fortification Index Proxyopoly TM ratings. It demonstrates hostility, the board's unwillingness to yield to shareholders even on how votes are counted, and fortification, embedding a power-preserving rule in the bylaws. It also exacerbates proxy accumulation resistance. If activists know the deck is stacked by counting votes, they're even less likely to try a campaign. This single issue thus exemplifies the interlocking nature of Amazon's entrenchment techniques. As of now, Amazon has not resolved this controversy. The logical resolution would be for the board to voluntarily adopt a true simple majority vote standard for all matters, excluding uncontested director elections which are already majority of cast. This would mean an overhaul of how results are reported on shareholder proposals. Essentially, no more counting abstentions as against. Such a move would likely come only if Amazon's board feels pressure from more major institutional investors or if a future shareholder proposal on the topic gains even more support. Notably, Amazon's 2025 proxy indicates that 78% of votes supported say on pay in 2024, up from 56% in 2022, suggesting the board responded when they felt a real risk of losing a vote. Perhaps a similarly close call on governance proposal could spur change. However, at this time, Amazon appears dug in. In the realm of public controversies, the average person might not know about vote counting formulas, but they have likely heard about Amazon's issues with unions, taxes, or antitrust. Those are serious controversies too, which we address elsewhere, yet we highlight the vote counting scandal as the signature controversy because it goes to the heart of how power is perpetuated at Amazon. It's quite a scandal. There are no warehouse workers protesting in the streets about voting formulas, no hashtags trending on X about abstention math, but it's profoundly important for the integrity of shareholder governance. If Proxyopoly TM had a Hall of Fame or infamy for corporate governance gimmicks, Amazon's dual vote counting standard would be an inductee. It is a prime example, no pun intended, of the subtle ways a corporation can say, heads we win, tails you lose, to its own shareholders. As long as this remains in place, one can fairly question whether Amazon shareholder votes are legitimate expressions of investor sentiment or predetermined management victories. Concluding this controversy highlight, let's put it in satirical terms. Amazon has mastered 2-day shipping, cloud computing, and Hollywood streaming. But its most impressive innovation might be the next day rejection. No matter how many shareholders send in votes for change, by the time the votes arrive at Amazon's door and are counted, the answer is seemingly always no. It's an innovation in keeping power, and one that shareholders and regulators alike should scrutinize. Before we dive into the board voting recommendations section of this podcast, it's noted that other controversies such as Amazon labor practices and antitrust issues certainly merit attention. For instance, Amazon's persistent union resistance, from the high-profile Bessemer, Alabama warehouse to reports of employee surveillance, underscores a broader culture of antipathy to sharing power, whether with shareholders or employees as stakeholders. Likewise, the ongoing Federal Trade Commission case will test whether Amazon can be held to account by public authorities or whether it can continue to operate relatively unchecked. These issues all tie back to our Proxyopoly TM ratings. A high shareholder hostility quotient in the case of labor resistance to worker voices, a high regulatory evasion measure in the case of antitrust evading competitive constraints. We weave these themes into our analysis and recommendations. But in terms of a singular controversy that captures Amazon's Proxyopolis, the Formula One vote count saga stands out as defining. Moving on to the board voting recommendations section, taking into account everything we've just heard of the Proxyopoly podcast. At the upcoming 2025 annual general meeting, Amazon shareholders are asked to elect 12 directors to the board. Each nominee will serve until the next annual meeting. Under a majority voting standard, each needs more than 50% of votes cast to be elected. The Proxyopoly TM analysis of Amazon's governance raises serious concerns about the board's composition and performance in safeguarding shareholder interests. In the following analysis, Proxyopoly TM provides detailed voting recommendations for each director nominee: for, against, or in one case, abstain, along with the rationale grounded in our findings. These recommendations aim to promote a board that can rectify the power imbalances identified. We approach this with a blend of formal analysis with a touch of dry irony, benefiting Proxyopoly TM style. Before we dive into the individuals, one note on approach. Proxyopoly TM generally favors refreshment and accountability. Directors who have overseen the problematic practices highlighted, such as vote rigging, hostility to investors, inadequate oversight of risks, etc., should be held accountable. Conversely, newer directors who bring needed skills or independence may deserve support to continue steering improvements. We also weigh factors like diversity, tenure, and committee roles in Proxyopoly TM evaluation of any board of directors. Now on to the nominees. The first name on the docket for election to the board of directors is Jeffrey P. Bezos. Proxyopoly TM recommendation: vote against. Jeffrey Bezos, as founder, executive chair of the board, age 61, director since 1994, Jeff Bezos is without question the visionary who built Amazon. But in a governance context, he personifies the concentration of power that underlies Amazon's Proxyopolis. As executive chair and former CEO, Bezos maintains a tight grip on the company. He has never truly relinquished control. He owns nearly 10% of the stock and arguably 100% of the board's deference. Under his watch, Amazon instituted and perpetuated the shareholder unfriendly practices we critique in this podcast, including the infamous vote counting formula and the blanket opposition to all shareholder proposals. The very need for a shareholder proposal to acquire an independent share is a direct referendum on Bezos' continued dominance. The board's argument against that proposal, that it would simplify the board's ability to choose leadership structure, rings hollow when one realizes the current flexibility simply means Bezos stays as long as he wishes on the board. Voting against Bezos is a signal that no individual, not even a genius founder, should be irreplaceable or beyond oversight. It is also practically the only way shareholders can register disapproval of Amazon's overall governance, given Bezos is the architect of it. One might say this is largely symbolic. After all, Bezos' shares and those aligned with him virtually guarantee his re-election. But symbolism matters. A significant against vote would put Mr. Bezos on notice that shareholders are uneasy with the imperial state of Amazon's board. In dry irony terms, Bezos famously said, quote, "Amazon is not too big to fail," quote, unquote, and that one day it will go bankrupt. We're not suggesting anything so drastic, but we do think Amazon is too big for one man to rule indefinitely. It's time to inject some drastic democratic spirit into this corporate monarchy. With deep respect for his accomplishments, we nevertheless recommend shareholders to withhold their support for Mr. Bezos at the upcoming annual general meeting by voting against his re-election to the board of directors. The company's next chapter calls for broader accountability and independent oversight, which cannot flourish while the founder's shadow looms so large. Moving on to director number 2 on the docket, up for re-election to Amazon's board of directors at its annual general meeting is Andrew R. Jassy. Proxyopoly TM recommendation, vote 4. President and Chief Executive Officer, age 55, director since 2021. Rationale in support of Proxyopoly's TM's recommendation to vote for. Andy Jassy has served as CEO for a few years, succeeding Bezos, and is still in the process of establishing his track record. Proxyopoly TM recommends a vote for Mr. Jassy, but with important caveats and expectations. Unlike Bezos, Jassy does not yet have unchecked personal authority. He operates with Bezos above him as chair. Removing Jassy would not address core governance concerns we have. In fact, it could strengthen Bezos' influence if Bezos were to step back or install another loyalist. Instead, keeping Jassy in place while pushing for a more independent board around him is more prudent course for shareholders. Jassy brings deep knowledge of Amazon's operations. He built Amazon Web Services into a cloud juggernaut, and continuity in leadership is paramount at Amazon. Operationally, Amazon's performance under Jassy has had ups and downs. 2022 was challenging with cost overhangs, but he executed layoffs and efficiency moves. 2023 saw a recovery in stock price and solid AWS growth. There have been no red flags of mismanagement egregious enough to warrant a CEO ouster at this stage. On the contrary, Jassy has shown willingness to respond to some shareholder feedback. He took zero new equity in 2024 after the say-on-pay backlash, indicating he's aware of investor concerns about his pay. From a governance standpoint, we would like to see Jassy step out of Bezos' shadow and cultivate a more shareholder-responsive culture. Voting for Jassy now is not an endorsement of the status quo entirely, but rather a vote of confidence that he can steer Amazon in a positive direction if supported by a reformed board. Proxyopoly TM essentially wants Mr. Jassy to succeed, but with the understanding that success includes addressing the environmental, social, and governance issues that shareholders raise, not just hitting financial targets. Next director on the docket for re-election to Amazon's board of directors at its upcoming annual general meeting is Keith B. Alexander. Proxyopoly TM recommendation vote against. Independent director, former NSA director and U.S. Army general retired, age 71, director since 2020. General Keith Alexander's appointment to Amazon's board was controversial from the start, and the concerns have not abated. While Alexander chairs the board security committee focusing on technology and cyber risk, a role seemingly suited to his expertise, his presence poses reputational and governance risks. Alexander is widely known as the public face of the NSA's mass surveillance program revealed by Edward Snowden. Under his NSA tenure, Alexander's programs like PRISM raised serious civil liberty issues. Many stakeholders, including Amazon's own employees, were unsettled by Amazon embracing someone with this legacy, especially as Amazon seeks to expand in cloud services for intelligence and defense. From a Proxyopoly TM perspective, Alexander's board role exemplifies the regulatory evasion and alignment with the national security establishment. There is no coincidence he joined the board when Amazon was heavily protesting the loss of a $10 billion Pentagon cloud contract to Microsoft. His presence can be seen as a strategic asset to influence defense and cybersecurity policy in Amazon's favor. That may help Amazon's business, but it underscores that Amazon's board is not prioritizing independent oversight so much as political connection. Proxyopoly TM questions whether General Alexander brings the kind of independent mindset to challenge management on typical shareholder concerns. His background is not in corporate governance, finance, or public company leadership, but in running a government agency with a mandate of secrecy. That perspective might actually reinforce Amazon's secretive top-down tendencies rather than alleviate them. Additionally, Alexander adds to the lack of diversity in thought on the board. He represents a very establishment viewpoint, a 71-year-old retired military male. The board already has several long-tenured members with government ties. Do shareholders benefit from retaining General Alexander versus potentially bringing in a different independent director with, say, human rights, consumer privacy, or employee safety expertise? Proxyopoly TM believes the latter, which would better serve the company at this juncture. On performance, there's no publicly disclosed failing on Alexander's part. He's attended meetings and likely contributed on cyber issues, but his continued presence sends a message that Amazon values insider influence in DC over stakeholder trust. Given controversies such as Amazon's own use of surveillance tech, having an ex-spy master on the board can be seen as doubling down on a Big Brother image which is tone-deaf to public sentiment. Therefore, Proxyopoly TM recommends an against vote on the docket for General Alexander's re-election. This is a vote for accountability and optics as much as anything. Amazon can find other qualified experts for the board who don't carry the same baggage. As a quip, Amazon is a great data collection, and it doesn't need the guy who taught the class on data collection to also watch over shareholders' data, especially when he once mused about stopping newspaper reports from publishing leaks. Shareholders deserve directors more attuned to transparency and privacy concerns. Director number 4 out of 12 on the docket up for re-election at Amazon's upcoming annual general meeting is Edith W. Cooper. Proxyopoly TM recommendation, vote for. Independent director, co-founder, Medley, and former Goldman Sachs executive vice president, age 59, director since 2021. Edith Cooper is a relatively new addition to the board. Joined in September 21 and brings valuable experience in human capital management. She was head of human capital management at Goldman Sachs. She also enhances board diversity as the board's African American woman, which is important for a company with a workforce as diverse and large as Amazon's. As chair of the Leadership Development and Compensation Committee, Ms. Cooper has been at the forefront of addressing shareholder concerns on executive pay. Under her oversight, the committee made the crucial decision not to give CEO Jassy new equity in 2022 and 2024 after the shareholder debate on pay, demonstrating her responsiveness. Proxyopoly TM recommends a vote for Ms. Cooper, citing a few reasons. First, her tenure is short. She isn't responsible for the historical entrenchment problems and has had limited time to influence Amazon's governance. In that short time, there are positive signs. For example, Amazon's 2024 proxy touts enhanced shareholder outreach on compensation and cites that outreach as informing their pay practices, something her committee likely led. That indicates Ms. Cooper may be a voice for engagement and responsiveness on the board, as a breath of fresh air on a board that otherwise has been standoffish with investors. Second, her background in human capital could be critical as Amazon navigates workforce issues. Amazon's handling of workplace safety, DEI, and culture has been under intense scrutiny. Having a director who deeply understands talent, culture, and inclusion from a top firm is an asset. We would hope Ms. Cooper applies that knowledge to push Amazon toward a better outcome on employee well-being and inclusion, areas where Amazon has faced criticism in the past. There's some irony that a former HR head from Wall Street, an industry not beloved for warm labor practices, is a champion for Amazon's workers. But Goldman in recent years did actually make strides in diversity in employee programs under leaders like Cooper. Third, Ms. Cooper is on the board of PepsiCo and serves as an independent director elsewhere, meaning she has comparative perspective on governance. PepsiCo, for instance, has an independent chairman and more shareholder-friendly stances on some issues. Cooper could import some of those best practices into Amazon's board deliberations. We note that Ms. Cooper does not have an apparent conflict or controversies. She has also not been on the board long enough to be complicit in things like the vote counting saga. If anything, as a newcomer, she could influence the board to modernize. We hope that she advocates internally for fixing the vote standard, given her exposure to other boards that use simple majority. Given these points, Proxyopoly TM sees no cause to remove Ms. Cooper. Rather, retaining her is beneficial. Supporting Edith Cooper for re-election to the board of directors of Amazon.com Inc. aligns with encouraging a more open, diverse, and responsive board. If the board had more Edith Coopers and fewer entrenched 20-year-old male veterans, Amazon might well have a lower neutral Proxyopoly TM score. Let's keep her in mind and in the mix to continue nudging toward that direction. Next on the docket for re-election to the board of directors at the Amazon.com Inc. annual general meeting is Jamie S. Gorelick, which Proxyopoly TM has a recommendation of vote against. Independent director, partner at WilmerHale, former U.S. Deputy Attorney General, age 72, director since 2012. Jamie Gorelick has served on Amazon's board for over a decade and currently holds two critical roles: lead independent director and chair of the Nominating and Corporate Governance Committee. We infer the latter from context. While Ms. Gorelick is a distinguished attorney and was one of the early female members of Amazon's board, her lengthy tenure and leadership positions tie her directly to the governance shortcomings identified by Proxyopoly TM. Proxyopoly TM recommended an against vote for Ms. Gorelick as a call for board refreshment and accountability for governance failings. As lead independent director, Ms. Gorelick is supposed to champion shareholders' interests in the boardroom, to ensure independent directors have a voice separate from management and that concerns are addressed. However, under her leadership, Amazon's board has doubled down on anti-shareholder stances. The persistence of the vote counting issue, the refusal to implement any major governance reforms, and the often dismissive tone toward investors all occurred under her watch. As chair of the nominating and governance committees, she oversees board evaluations and nominations, yet we see a board that until very recently barely added new independent voices. It's notable that almost all of the truly new independent blood on the board, Cooper, Nguyen, Brad Smith, others, arrived only in the last 2 to 3 years out of her 10-year-plus long tenure, arguably in response to external pressure. Why did it take so long? Incumbent directors like Ms. Gorelick may have been content with the status quo, leading to a stale board composition for much of the 2010s of her tenure. Furthermore, Ms. Gorelick's professional background, while impressive, also entails potential conflicts. As a partner at a major law firm, Wilmer Hale, she represented large companies and institutions. There's nothing wrong with that, but it can predispose a director to side with management perspectives. Also, her network is very established. She sits on the board of Amazon and previously on other corporate and nonprofit boards. One wonders if she has the incentive to rock the boat on behalf of restless investors or employees. The lead independent director should be the counterweight to a figure like Bezos. Instead, it appears she's more of an advisor. The board unified front against shareholder proposals implies that the lead director did not advocate compromise or concession internally. Or if she did, she was ineffective. Another factor, tenure and overboarding concerns. She has been on the board for 13 years. Normally, governance experts start to worry about 10 plus years that independence can diminish for an independent director, being or becoming too allied with management. At 72 years old, she's also one of the oldest directors. Many boards have retirement ages around 72 to 75. It's prudent to begin succession. Also, besides Amazon, Gorelick serves on at least one other significant board. She was on the board of VeriSign, though not sure if currently. While not extreme overboarding, her plate is full with law practice and board duties. In sum, Ms. Gorelick has provided valuable service, but the time has come for change. Voting against Jamie Gorelick sends a message that the status quo governance is not acceptable. We seek a lead independent director who will truly lead for the independents. Perhaps one of the newer members could take up that mantle if she steps down. Also, fresh eyes on the governance and nominating committees could finally tackle issues like equitable vote counting and board diversity of expertise. Ironically, as former Deputy Attorney General, Ms. Gorelick surely knows when to rest a case. And Proxyopoly thinks the case is strong that her tenure on Amazon's board should conclude. Shareholders can appreciate her contributions to Amazon's rise, while also asserting that a new generation of oversight is needed. Thus, Proxyopoly TM recommends a vote against to withhold support from Ms. Gorelick at the upcoming annual general meeting of Amazon.com Inc. Next director up for re-election on the docket, we have Daniel P. Huttenlocher. Proxyopoly TM recommendation, vote for. Independent director, Dean, MIT Schwarzman College of Computing, age 60, director since 2016. Proxyopoly TM supports the re-election of Daniel P. Huttenlocher with a vote for at the upcoming annual general meeting on the grounds that Dan Huttenlocher is an academic and technologist who joined Amazon's board in 2016. He has a background in computer science, formerly dean at Cornell Tech, now at MIT, and brings technical experience to the board's deliberations. Proxyopoly TM recommends voting for his re-election largely because his profile fills a need on the board and he has not been heavily implicated in governance controversies. Huttenlocher's presence likely benefits Amazon, especially on issues of innovation, AI, and tech strategy. Given Amazon's reliance on cutting-edge tech from AWS to AI for Alexa to automation and warehouses, having a director who genuinely understands these domains is critical. He presumably plays a key role on the security committee, if not chair, certainly a member, giving his computing expertise, and or audit committee for tech risk oversight, with AI governance becoming a rising concern, as evidenced by a shareholder proposal on the AI oversight this year. Huttenlocher's insight is valuable. In fact, one of these shareholder proposals on the proxy statement, number 8, asks for an assessment of the board structure for AI oversight, essentially suggesting the board ensure proper expertise and possibly a committee for artificial intelligence. Arguably, Huttenlocher is the exact kind of expert needed for such oversight. Removing him would cut against the intent of better AI governance. Instead, Proxyopoly would prefer to see him actively engaged with that proposal spirit and maybe lead to an effort to formalize AI risk oversight at Amazon's board level. On governance, Huttenlocher does not have a public record of speaking out, but neither is he known as an obstacle. At approximately 9 years of his tenure, he's approaching that stage where one might ask for fresh perspectives soon. However, compared to some longer incumbents, he's not the first candidate for turnover. He also adds some diversity of perspective as an academic rather than a business executive or lifelong director. Academics on boards can be more independently minded. They are not beholden to corporate circles in the same way. Proxyopoly TM considers this a plus in theory. One can make the mild critique that Dr. Huttenlocher has been on the board during the period we identified issues like vote counting and hostility. As a member, he shares collective responsibility. But given his likely focus on technical matters, it's hard to lay those governance strategy decisions at his feet. More likely, the governance committee, which he doesn't chair or even perhaps sit on, and the lead independent director rather handle those. We also note that he's not overboarded or stretched thin. His main job is MIT Dean, and Amazon is probably his only corporate board commitment of this scale, meaning he presumably can dedicate sufficient time. Therefore, supporting Dan Huttenlocher's re-election makes sense. Proxyopoly TM wants to maintain strong tech expertise on the board as we simultaneously push for better governance. In fact, Andrew Nguyen, another AI luminary, now also on the board. Amazon has 2 top-notch tech brains in the room. That's a strategic asset worth keeping. The key will be encouraging these tech-focused directors to also weigh in on governance issues. Until then, there is no harm in retaining him. Therefore, vote for. Next up on the docket for re-election to the board of directors of Amazon.com Inc. at its annual general meeting is Andrew Y. Nguyen. Vote recommendation 4. Independent director, AI entrepreneur, and Stanford University adjunct professor, age 47, director since 2024. Rationale: Andrew Nguyen is one of the newest additions to Amazon's board, appointed in 2024. And a globally renowned expert in artificial intelligence. As a co-founder of Coursera and a leading AI scientist, Dr. Nguyen brings cutting-edge insight that is highly relevant to Amazon's future. We empathetically recommend voting for Dr. Nguyen's re-election. Dr. Nguyen's appointment itself may well have been a response to shareholder and public calls for stronger oversight of AI and technology ethics. Proposal number 8 on this year's proxy statement ballot asks for a board assessment of artificial intelligence oversight. Amazon's response is that it is a leader in responsible AI. Having Andrew on the board substantively backs up that claim. as he literally wrote the book or taught the Coursera course on ethical and effective AI deployment. Proxyopoly TM views his presence as a positive step toward addressing some regulatory evasion and social impact concerns. He can guide Amazon on issues like algorithmic bias, AI-driven decision impacts on workers or customers, and ensure the company stays on the right side of emerging AI regulations. In terms of governance contributions, Wynn is independent and unencumbered by the history of Amazon's internal culture. He is a fresh voice. It's also notable that at 47, he'd be the youngest director, adding generational diversity. As a newcomer, we obviously do not attribute any of Amazon's past governance problems to him. Instead, we hope that he can be a part of the solution. His expertise founding Coursera suggests that he is an entrepreneurial mindset that might mesh with Amazon's, but also as an educator, likely values transparency and the greater good. One might say the only risk with Dr. Wynn is whether he has sufficient time and focus for the board duties, given he's actively involved in AI ventures and teaching. However, serving on one major board is manageable, and his passion for AI could mean he's highly engaged with Amazon's strategy. Amazon, through AWS and products like Alexa, is heavily invested in AI, so his contributions align with core business needs. Also, his relatively short stint so far means that we don't have evidence of his board performance yet, but given his intellectual rigor, Proxyopoly TM anticipates he will be diligent. In short, shareholders should enthusiastically support Andrew Wynn for the re-election to the board of directors, as he represents the kind of forward-looking, domain-specific expertise that can help Amazon innovate responsibly and AI ethics. We see no downside in retaining a director of Dr. Wynn's caliber, and significant upside for Amazon's innovation governance. In a witty sense, if Amazon's board were an algorithm in need of training data, adding Andrew Wynn provides a rich new input that should greatly improve its predictive accuracy. Vote for Andrew Wynn to keep Amazon's board intelligent, both literally and figuratively. Next up on the docket for re-election to Amazon's board of directors at its upcoming annual general meeting is Indra K. Nooyi. Proxyopoly TM recommendation. Vote for. On the grounds that Indra Nooyi is a respected former chief executive of one of the most prominent female business leaders globally. She chairs Amazon's audit committee, bringing financial acumen and leadership experience to the board. Proxyopoly TM recommends voting for Ms. Nooyi's re-election, as she has been a force for improved oversight and her continued presence benefits shareholders. As Audit Committee Chair, Ms. Nooyi oversees financial reporting, risk management, and compliance. Under her watch, Amazon has enhanced certain disclosures. For example, publishing a global tax contribution report and more ESG data, arguably in response to investor calls for transparency. The Audit Committee also bears responsibility for monitoring internal controls and legal regulatory compliance, areas where, aside from the vote counting shenanigans we've discussed in this podcast, fall more under governance. There have been no major accounting scandals or material weaknesses reported, reflecting well on Nooyi's stewardship. Moreover, Ms. Nooyi's background as CEO of PepsiCo from 2006 to 2018 means she brings insight on managing a large global workforce and brand. PepsiCo, like Amazon, faced shareholder proposals on environmental and social issues. Nooyi, in her tenure at PepsiCo, engaged with such concerns. She championed sustainability and healthier product initiatives at Pepsi. This perspective is invaluable as Amazon grapples with parallel issues, health and safety of workers, environmental footprint, etc. She also has experience dealing with activist investors and can help Amazon and its board better understand how to constructively respond rather than stonewall. Importantly, Ms. Nooyi adds diversity in both gender and international perspectives, and is independent with no ties to Bezos. Her tenure of approximately 5 years is moderate, not excessive. If anything, we'd like to see her influence grow on the board, perhaps as a candidate for lead independent director, if that role were to rotate, given her gravitas and somewhat outsider status relative to the Bezos inner circle. One might argue her multiple board commitments, being also on the board of Royal Philips NV and previously on the Schlumberger board, could limit her time. However, she stepped down from PepsiCo's board in 2019 and focuses on select engagements. Amazon likely ranks high in her priorities. All indications are that she is a diligent committee chair. Amazon's audit committee met 6 times in 2024, presumably under her leadership, and all meetings were well attended. Given her positive contributions, proven leadership, and the relative need for strong independent voices on this board, Proxyopoly TM supports Ms. Nooyi's re-election with a vote for at the upcoming annual general meeting. In a lighter vein, Amazon's board could use the fizz of Ms. Nooyi's PepsiCo experience to balance out all that Seattle black coffee. She brings a refreshing, no-nonsense approach to the board's oversight, which shareholders quenching for board refreshment should welcome. Vote for Indra Nooyi at the upcoming annual general meeting of Amazon.com Inc. Next up on the docket for re-election to the board of directors for Amazon.com Inc. is Jonathan J. Rubinstein. Proxyopoly TM recommendation: vote against. Independent director, former Apple and Palm executive, age 67, director since 2010. John Rubinstein has served on Amazon's board for nearly 15 years and currently chairs the nominating and corporate governance committees and is identified as the lead independent director of Robinhood's board, indicating his governance involvement elsewhere. While Mr. Rubinstein has strong tech industry credentials, famously leading development of Apple's iPod, his prolonged tenure on Amazon's board and role as governance chair make him accountable for the entrenched governance practices we've critiqued on this podcast. Proxyopoly TM recommends voting against Rubinstein for re-election at the upcoming annual general meeting on the grounds that during Mr. Rubinstein's tenure as governance chair, the board's compositions and policies have shown only glacial change. It was under his committee's purview to consider refreshing the board or adopting governance enhancements. Yet, for much of the 2010s, Amazon's board remained relatively static, and key shareholder-friendly reforms, majority voting, proxy access, were adopted only when they became unavoidable norms. Meanwhile, entrenched practices like high special meeting threshold and abstention vote policies remained intact. As governance chair, Rubinstein should have been the champion of aligning Amazon's governance with best practice, but instead the company became an outlier defending arcane rules. This indicates a lapse in proactive governance. Furthermore, Mr. Rubinstein's long tenure since late 2010 raises concerns about his independence. 15 years on the board can transform an independent director into an insider in mindset. He's worked alongside Bezos and senior management for a long time. It's likely he was the hand-picked by Bezos back then due to his tech experience and perhaps personal rapport. After so many years, can he truly be impartial to evaluate the need for change or challenge Bezos or Jassy? The evidence suggests not sufficiently. Otherwise, we might have seen him push for, say, a more reasonable special meeting threshold or an eventual transition to an independent chair structure as Bezos steps down. Eventually. Mr. Rubinstein's contributions on the tech side, he undoubtedly provided valuable guidance on hardware initiatives like Kindle, given his Palm Apple background, which are acknowledged in this report. However, Amazon has other tech-savvy directors, Huttenlocher, even Jassy himself. The greater gap is in governance leadership, and ironically, the governance chair has not filled it adequately. In our Proxyopoly TM scoring, Amazon's Bylaw Fortification Index and Shareholder Hostility Quotient remain high. The governance committee under Rubinstein bears direct responsibility for those areas. Additionally, Mr. Rubinstein serves as the lead director at another high-profile tech company of Robinhood. Being governance lead at two fast-moving companies is a heavy ask, even for someone of his capability. Shareholders may worry his attention is split, that he may prioritize one over the other. Robinhood has had its own governance and regulatory challenges. Balancing both could dilute his effectiveness. For these reasons, Proxyopoly TM recommends voting against Mr. Rubinstein at the upcoming annual general meeting. This is not a personal indictment of his tech wisdom, but an institutional critique. The governance chair did not sufficiently govern. By opposing his re-election, shareholders send a clear message and demand for fresh governance leadership and a reset of the board's approach to shareholder rights. And an ironic nod to Mr. Rubinstein's past. He helped bring the world the click wheel on the iPod, the revolutionary way to navigate content. But at Amazon's board, navigation seems stuck on a repetitive loop. It's time to hit the next track. Replacing Mr. Rubinstein with new independent director could inject new perspective and break this cycle. Therefore, Proxyopoly TM recommends withholding support for the re-election of Mr. Rubinstein by voting against his re-election at the annual general meeting. Number 10 on the docket for the re-election to the board of directors, Brad D. Smith. Proxyopoly TM recommendation vote for. Independent director, president of Marshall University, former CEO of Intuit, age 59, director since 2023. Brad Smith joined Amazon's board in 2023 and brings a wealth of relevant experience as a former CEO of Intuit and current president of Marshall University. Proxyopoly TM recommends voting for Mr. Smith's election as he's a fresh addition likely to strengthen the board's oversight in key areas like customer-centric innovation and human capital. Mr. Smith's track record at Intuit was marked by successful innovation and a strong corporate culture focus. Intuit, under his leadership, often cited good workplace practices and customer satisfaction. These are directly applicable to Amazon's challenges, improving treatment of employees while continuing to innovate for customers. Smith has sat on other boards and is known for a collaborative yet principled style of governance. The fact that Amazon sought him out suggests a recognition that his perspective from running a big tech company serving millions of small businesses and consumers is valuable to inject. Since he joined very recently, Mr. Smith hasn't had a chance to influence much yet, but that's exactly why shareholders should give him the opportunity. His fresh eyes can help shake up any complacency. Notably, as an outsider who wasn't part of Bezos' inner circle, he can be more impartial in deliberations. Also, his background in finance means he is likely complementary to Miss Nooyi on audit and brings strategic finance savvy. One specific area Mr. Smith could contribute to is improving Amazon's responsiveness to small business partners on third-party sellers. Intuit's ethos was very customer-driven and partner-friendly. Amazon has sometimes been criticized for squeezing marketplace sellers. Smith can advocate for balancing Amazon's power with fairness in its ecosystem, a governance consideration tied to long-term sustainability, and a facet of regulatory risk as well. Given that he has been on the board only about a year, it's premature to judge his impact, but there have been no issues. He attended all meetings since appointment and presumably engaged in the 5 audit committee meetings and 4 leadership committee meetings in 2024. He appears dedicated to his new role. In summary, Brad Smith represents the kind of independent, modern-thinking director Amazon board needs more of. We encourage shareholders to support him and thereby endorse continuing the board's modest trend toward refreshments. In colloquial terms, Brad Smith helped TurboTax find deductions. Maybe he'll help Amazon's board find where it can deduct some hubris. Proxyopoly TM recommends voting for Brad D. Smith at the upcoming annual general meeting. Next on the docket, we have director number 11 out of 12, Patricia Q. Stonesifer. Proxyopoly TM recommendation, vote against. Independent director, former CEO of the Gates Foundation. Early Amazon board member, age 67, director since 1997. Patty Stonesifer is Amazon's longest serving director, having joined the board in 1997 when Amazon was just a young public company. Over 28 years of service, she has contributed significantly to Amazon's growth story. However, such an extraordinary tenure is in itself a governance concern. We recommend voting against Ms. Stonesifer at Amazon's upcoming annual general meeting. Ms. Stonesifer's re-election as her continued presence epitomizes board entrenchment and potentially stifles refreshment, hence the recommendation for the vote against. It is exceedingly rare for an independent director to serve nearly 3 decades on a board. Most governance best practices suggest an effective directorship tenure might be 10 to 15 years before independence or fresh thinking erodes. Ms. Stonesifer has nearly double that. There is no doubt she has deep knowledge of Amazon, but that familiarity can breed blind spots. She has been through every chapter of Amazon's history, likely becoming very close to Bezos on the leadership team. While loyal service is commendable, at some point, such a director becomes less likely to ask hard questions, consciously or unconsciously, and they become guardian of a founder's legacy. From a procedural stance, Ms. Stonesifer's lengthy tenure also blocks board diversity renewal. Though she is a woman and her presence has contributed to gender diversity historically, the board now has several female directors. Thankfully, there is an opportunity to add perhaps a director with a different diversity in professional background, say an expert in labor relations or sustainability, which her seat could accommodate if vacated. Given her enormous contributions, some shareholders may feel a sense of debt or sentimentality toward Ms. Stonesifer, but the best tribute to her legacy is to ensure Amazon's board evolves for future success. Hanging on indefinitely is not in the company's or her own best interest. Indeed, her stepping down would be seen as an act of good governance, setting an example that no director should become permanent. Therefore, Proxyopoly TM recommends a vote against Patricia Stonesifer. And in general irony, Ms. Stonesifer has given Amazon nearly a lifetime of service. It's only fair that we let her prime her retirement package and deliver it with our thanks. A vote against is not a personal rebuke, but a professional necessary step to refresh the board after a generation of service on the board. Finally, on the docket, we have director number 12 out of 12 up for re-election at Amazon.com Inc.'s upcoming annual general meeting. Wendell P. Weeks. Proxyopoly TM recommendation. Vote. Abstain. Independent director, CEO of Corning Inc., age 66, director since 2016. Wendell Weeks, the CEO of Corning, has been on Amazon's board since 2016. He brings current experience running a large, innovative manufacturing company and has contributed to Amazon's board, like on the audit committee, given his public company CEO financial expertise. Proxyopoly team has a mixed view on Mr. Weeks. Oh, fucking hell. He provides valuable perspective, but is nearly 9 years of tenure and carries extensive outside commitments. Proxyopoly TM recommends an abstain vote for Mr. Weeks to signal mild concern and encourage the board to consider a future refreshment for his board seat, without calling for an immediate removal. On the positive side, Mr. Weeks offers shareholder-oriented mindset as an active CEO who is accountable to his own shareholders at Corning. He knows what it's like to answer investor concerns and could be a moderating influence when Amazon's board leans too insular. His background in material sciences and manufacturing adds a dimension to tech-heavy board. Amazon's logistics and hardware endeavors like Echo supply chains for AWS data centers, etc. benefit from its insight. By all accounts, he has been a diligent director, attending over 75% of all meetings consistently in his tenure. He also chaired Amazon's compensation committee in the past, meaning he helped shape policies prior to Edith Cooper, and to his credit, after the 2022 SIG pay scare, the committee adjusted its course. However, there are a few reasons for abstention. As a gentle nudge, Mr. Weeks is still a sitting CEO of a major company. That role is very demanding, and Corning itself is a $30 billion market cap enterprise requiring full attention, especially in challenging economic cycles. Many institutional investors and proxy advisors have guidelines that CEOs should not sit on more than one outside board. Mr. Weeks sits on at least one outside board, Amazon, so he is at least at that limit. Any further outside roles would be problematic, even at one. The concern is whether he can dedicate the need of time for Amazon's complex issues while running Corning. So far, he has managed, but as Corning CEO since 2005, he's no doubt very busy and possibly approaching a phase where a succession to Corning will occupy his focus. Additionally, by 2025, he will have served 9 years on Amazon's board. By our philosophy, board should start considering rotation around the decade mark to infuse new ideas. Mr. Weeks is not at an emergency level of entrenchment yet, but this term could be appropriately his last or second last before bringing in someone new. An abstain vote communicates to him and the board that shareholders are watchful about long tenures and overboarding, but not outright opposed to service at this time due to current contributions. And why abstain and not against? Well, we acknowledge the practical value Mr. Weeks still brings. We don't want to force out too many competent directors all at once. We have already suggested against for several others. Maintaining continuity with someone like Weeks who provides external perspective and stability, especially on financial oversight, is beneficial, as others might potentially depart as a result of these votes. Abstaining is a calibrated approach. It neither boosts his for tally nor directly tries to unseat him. It effectively says, we're neutral for now, but we have our eye on you to ensure refreshment in the near future. All right. In our board election summary, to recap our board voting stance, we urged shareholders to vote against Bezos, Alexander, Gorelick, Rubinstein, and Stonesifer, who represent the core of entrenchment and outdated governance. To vote for 6 directors, Jassy, Cooper, Huttenlocher, Wynn, Nooyi, Smith, who bring needed skills or fresh outlooks, and to abstain on 1 director, Weeks, as a moderate signal for future change. This balanced approach retains critical expertise while registering dissatisfaction with the status quo power structure. If implemented, and these votes counted, duly processed, it would tilt the board toward a more modern, accountable composition, better aligned with shareholders' long-term interests. Now, this full Proxyopoly report, we're going to take a break here in a second. This full Proxyopoly report is available on the Patreon, which can be found on the Linktree, which is linktree/nascarcosa. And usually we touch base on the policy recommendations by Proxyopoly TM. However, there's going to be 10 of these. I'm not going to get into all of them. We are running up on time. Amazon should embrace simple majority vote standards for shareholders. Amazon should lower the special meeting thresholds to 10 to 15%. Amazon should separate the chair and CEO roles with an independent chair policy. Amazon should implement tenure limits or retirement ages for directors. Amazon should formalize a board-level sustainability and stakeholder committee. Amazon should strengthen shareholder engagement and responsiveness. Amazon should continue diversifying the board's composition. Amazon should address regulatory risk proactively. And in closing, Amazon stands at a point where tweaking its governance will not stifle its success, but only safeguard it. The recommendations provided by Proxyopoly TM are designed to dilute excessive control, fortify independent oversight, and rebuild a measure of goodwill with stakeholders. Implementing these and counting all these votes at the shareholder meeting could lower Amazon's Proxyopoly score to a more neutral Proxyopoly TM score, which in this context is a good thing, indicating a shift toward a balanced governance. From a Proxyopoly TM perspective, the final Proxyopoly TM score for Amazon.com Inc. is again positive 0.68, which is high but not irredeemable. With concerted reforms, Amazon can migrate closer to a neutral score, meaning it could operate with a governance equilibrium benefiting its stature. Proxyopoly TM believes Amazon's management is capable of the same boldness in governance as it shows in business. It requires a bit of humility and foresight from the board, acknowledging that some shareholders and stakeholder demands have merit and acting before being forced to do so. Shareholders should monitor progress on these fronts. Voting results from this AGM, especially if some directors receive high opposition will speak loudly. If the board responds with constructive changes, for example, by fixing the vote standard or bringing on new directors next year, it will validate this shareholders' push. If not, further action may be warranted, such as stronger voting opposition in future years or engagement with proxy advisors to escalate issues. In the spirit of dry irony, Amazon has mastered the one-click shopping. Now it's time to master one share, one vote governance. The company that can deliver packages by drone can surely deliver a bit more democracy to its owners. Adopting these recommendations would show Amazon's leadership understands the difference between being incredibly inventive and being incredibly inflexible, and chooses the former when it comes to corporate governance. In conclusion, Amazon's board of directors has an opportunity to steer the company into a new era of governance excellence, matching its excellence in customer service and innovation. The Proxyopoly TM research report you have just listened to has pointed out the red marks. Now it's time for Amazon to turn them into gold stars. We remain optimistic that a company as audacious and resourceful as Amazon can reform itself from within, setting a new standard for how a trillion-dollar enterprise balances power with accountability. By implementing the recommendations you've just listened to on this podcast, Amazon could transform a Proxyopoly cautionary tale into a governance leader, all the while continuing to create value for shareholders, customers, employees, and society as stakeholders at large. And just like that, we're out of time, Proxyopolis. Thanks for tuning in and listening. As always, the final Proxyopoly score for Amazon.com Inc. is positive 0.68. And once again, your final disclaimer: the Proxyopoly score and accompanying analysis are purely hypothetical for entertainment and educational purposes only. Any resemblance to real-world events is purely coincidental, though with Amazon.com's governance trajectory, reality may be catching up faster than we expect. Thanks for tuning in, Proxyopolis, and if it ain't Proxyopoly, you're Proxyopolian.